We're here at the ancient ruins of Corinth. It's a beautiful sunny day. There are a few clouds high up in the sky. There are mountains a long way off in the distance, just hazy because of the distance. There's a slight breeze in the air. There are flags fluttering and some of the leaves on the trees are just gently being ruffled by the wind. It's quite warm. In the shade it's okay. It's not too hot at all, but the breeze takes away some of the heat. It's perhaps 30 degrees centigrade. But a lot cooler in the shade. In the ruins of ancient Corinth, here at the entrance, we're right next to a car park where tourist coaches are depositing busloads of tourists. There are cars coming and going, so there is hustle and bustle. There are birds flittering around, small sparrows I can see. Can't see any others. They're looking for crumbs from things that have been dropped off by tourists. And as you walk up the path of the entrance past the ticket gate where you buy your ticket for entrance into the park, the first thing you come to is an ancient well. And it's unlike any well that we would be used to, certainly in the West. It's been chiseled out of the stone. It looks like a building with rooms. There are two entrances on one side. It's a very rough stone, very rough. It stands maybe 20 feet high, with some excavations around it that have been dug channels. The ground all around it is dry, very dusty, sandy, stony. Lots of stones everywhere. There are some that have been excavated. You can see that they've been fashioned and chiseled. And there are others that are just cast aside. Maybe once upon a time they were part of the original structure or the streets. How this particular structure fits in with ancient Corinth is unclear at the moment. As you walk through past this big structure, there's a path that has railings on one side separating you from the car park, and there's a wire fence to stop unsuspecting tourists from entering the site, but also dropping over the side. There's a bit of a drop off in places here. There's still tumble down stones. This rough stone, I don't know if it's limestone, I'm not entirely sure. There are littered on the ground cut stones. I can see there's part of a column. It's perhaps has a circumference of two feet, maybe, just lying on the ground on its side. There's another one that has had deep channels chiseled around it in a spiral shape, and it's just lying on the ground. Towards the back of where I am, there's a tourist museum which is housing various artifacts that have been excavated from the site. The breeze is nice. Out in the sun here, there's no shade. Now the majority of the excavation of ancient Corinth is all exposed. Perhaps they removed the trees to help dig, but there are no trees. There's one or two shrubs. There are one or two trees, but there are not many. There are surrounding hillsides I can see off in the distance. There are lots of trees, lots of pine trees by the look of them. See the odd palm tree here and there. But as you continue around what would be the way that they are requiring the tourists to go there, you come across this fantastic structure. It's the Temple of Apollo. And there are 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 pillars that are intact, perhaps 10 meters tall, perhaps 2 meters circumference. They start quite wide at the bottom and narrow just ever so slightly. There's enormous stones at the top that are balanced on 5 of the pillars, and 2 remain completely free. And it's just raised up slightly higher than where I am at the moment, which is stunning. Looking at this Temple of Apollos, these 7 pillars, there are 2 that are freestanding. They don't have anything on top of them. They seem to be made of a slightly different stone. It's a orangey, is a sort of a more colourful stone. There's wire fencing around the structure to protect it. Thankfully, it's only very thin wire, so it doesn't obscure the monument. Between me and the monument is a distance of about perhaps 30 meters, 40 meters, and there's excavations in the ground in front of me that are fairly deep. Some of them are perhaps 2 meters deep by perhaps 3 meters across by 5 meters, maybe 6 meters. And they look like perhaps they were rooms or perhaps part of the structure, big stones as well that are forming the walls. There are other parts of pillars that I can see just strewn around, maybe 3 or 4. There's one just, there's a bell. I think the time is midday. There's another pillar just to one side of me about 10 meters away, which is freestanding. It's not very tall. It's perhaps 1.5 meters tall. It looks like it's supported by a couple of bricks underneath. The whole ground is dusty. There's sort of dead twigs and dead bits of plants. There's 1 or 2 weeds that are persistently growing out of the rocks that don't seem to want to give up. There's some walls as well, again just to one side, that are built, whether they've been rebuilt or whether they've been excavated. They look like they've been rebuilt with stones that are stacked on top of each other, although there is mud between some of them. So as we continue around, there's a big open area of about 100 meters square. It's just, there's some tourist paths that they've laid to crisscross to allow tourists to get from one place to another. But there's nothing here. It's just dirt, just dry, arid dirt. There's no real sense of smell. There's nothing. I can't really smell anything. Not particularly. That's about cold here. The air is a little moist. It's very warm, muggy, if you know what muggy means. So I'm walking around now on a concrete path as I get closer towards the Temple of Apollos, and revealed as I just climb up a slight slope, revealed to one side is an enormous area, probably 200 meters wide by 150 meters deep, of lots of stones stacked, maybe 3 or 4 high. The stones, individual stones, are maybe 1 meter by 0.5 meter by 0.5 meter. Big oblong stones, look very heavy, very, very heavy. And they're stacked, it's all been excavated. I don't know, it looks like ruins of rooms. None of them are very high. There is one structure that is perhaps 3 meters wide by 4 meters by perhaps 5 meters high, with a dome on top, but it's all been excavated. It looks like perhaps they've put the stones back together. That is some sort of structure. Perhaps it says in front of it what the structure is. Tourists from all over the world. I think I can hear German. Lots of people wandering around
Good.
As I continue walking, this following close by it, sort of a stream of tourists. I'm now walking past the Temple of Apollos. I'm within probably 10 meters of it. It's very tall. It's very tall, and you can see at the top some of the ornate carving at the top of these big high columns. Very heavy stones perched on the top of the three that I'm looking at the moment that are, although I can see some, joining two of these big stones, I can see some concrete, and I'm pretty sure I can see a bit of steel, so perhaps they've been reformed and put up there. They must have been. And so I'm not sure the ancient people who built this place would have had access to concrete and steel. Perhaps just to give tourists an idea of what it looked like. Interesting. As I'm continue past the Temple of Apollos, there is some columns that have obviously fallen. There's one in front of me on its side that's cracked into 4 pieces, maybe, and it's just lying on the side, just here. Something that's been chiseled and hewn out of solid stone thousands of years ago. It's just lying on the side here, and there's just behind that there's what looks to be perhaps one of the big stones that would have been balanced on the top of these enormous pillars that would have been this temple. How big the temple is not clear from what I can see, and the area is continuing to be, this kind of scrubland is very, it's like small plants, little twiggy type plants that have all died. It's all brown and arid. There's no greenery, although just a little short way back there's what looks like some sort of rhododendron bush with some green leaves. But other than that, this area is pretty much devoid of life. As I turn around 180 degrees and look at the open area I was describing earlier, looking at all of these ruins, all of these stones, I can see the area that is called the Forum, which is where Paul was tried by Gaius. And it's actually quite a good view from up here. I'm perhaps maybe 10-20 meters above the height of the Forum, and maybe perhaps 150 meters away, maybe a little bit more. So I get quite a good open view. Between me and the Forum there are many walls that have been excavated, again none higher than perhaps 2 meters. Most of them have been tumbled down. There are stones lying strewn all over the place. There's columns that are some standing, some laying down on their sides, some cracked, some intact. It almost looks messy. I guess this is what modern excavation looks like. Growing out the side of one of these walls is a fairly small pine tree with green needles, and I can see pine cones nestled along the branches. It looks nice. It looks nice. A nice splash of green, but generally between the stones and in these excavations, it's all this brown earth, these dead plants of some sort of weed, perhaps. Whether it dies or whether it's killed, I'm not sure. But I can see the Forum. It's thick with tourists at the moment. There is a stone in the centre of an open ground. The Forum itself is an area that's perhaps 30 metres wide by perhaps 5 metres high, and then there's a flat area on top, and it's all got big stones, these big stones that are perhaps 1 metre wide by 50 centimetres deep and 50 centimetres high, and these stones are stacked brick-like one on top of the other. There's maybe 4 or 5 courses high, so In total, it's 4 or 5 meters high, and Paul apparently was tried there by Gaius. And there's a stone in a clearing at the bottom. The whole area in front of it is completely clear, and that's apparently where Paul was tried. There are lots of tourists milling around. There seems to be a hot spot for the tourists. I can see a Bible translation consultant who is one of our team, and they are doing their translation work under the shade of a tree in the far distance, looking at the forum. They're translating Corinthians at the moment, or they're at least writing the material to help people translate the Bible, and I can see that she's sat under a tree looking at the forum, looking at the area where Paul was tried. Behind this area of excavation there is normal Greek life. The fence of this excavation area, ancient Corinth, is perhaps 100, 200 meters behind the forum. And then I can just see a house with red terracotta slates on the roof with cream whitewashed walls, white windows, and what looks to be a school, perhaps. And behind that, on the hills, you can see grove upon grove of olive trees disappearing up there, the mountain. And at the top of the mountain, in the far distance, perhaps a couple of miles away, behind that's directly overlooking ancient Corinth, is the temple of Aphrodite's. It's a long way up. I don't know how high it is, but it's a long way up. You can just about see an ancient, very old medieval castle. You can just see the battlements peeking over the top.
So scary.
The ground is steep as it climbs towards this mountain, I guess. And then there are, and on the foothills perhaps, are pine trees. There's open areas as well, but there's also multiple groves of olive trees, all gathered together in neat squares with the lines upon line of olive trees. And as the foothills give way to the solid stone, it gets very steep, almost sheer, as it climbs up to the very top, the height, which possibly could be a plateau. And at the top is this citadel castle, and so I'm told the Temple of Aphrodite's is at the top. Where the temple prostitutes that Paul referred to used to ply their wares, their trade. To either side of the mountain, it falls down the left. It falls down to some hills which are partly covered in pine trees, and over to the other side is what looks to be a continuation of the plateau at a similar height, but it's hard to tell from down here. And we're only just above sea level where I am at the moment, ancient Corinth. I can see the Mediterranean Sea off in the distance behind me. But I'm going to go and walk around to the forum and go and see what I can find there. As I walk up towards the forum here in ancient Corinth, passing just stone upon stone strewn around on the side of this big wide path. The path is a dirt path with some stones along it, and it's perhaps 20 meters wide, and there are stones that have been cut, probably by the looks of the cuts of them, that would have been on the roof or the tops of houses, maybe. There's a tree just next to the forum where my colleague is sat translating the Bible, and I'm just walking past a stone structure that is actually relatively, well, somewhat intact. It has no roof, but there's 4 walls of big stones. The stones are very rough, but they have been stuck together with, I'm not sure what. And there are a couple of statues, one that's ensconced inside. It has no head, but it has a body. Exquisite craftsmanship in the stone here, in this sculpture, with it depicting robes, some sort of Roman robe, I guess. Amazing that they were able to get such detail, but it's behind a wire fence, so can't get too close to it, maybe only a couple of meters. The ground is arid, lots of dead brush, weeds. There's some greenery here as well, not much though. And there is a tree here offering some shade with some green berries on, of some description. I don't know what they are, but it's offering some small amount of shade. And we've got the forum in front of me. There's a group of tourists there that are getting the tour by a local guide. And let's have a look at this structure. This is the one that I was viewed from afar. They've interesting. On the side, they have put a big slab of white marble, which is probably 1.5 meters square by maybe 40 centimeters deep. It's a big bit of white marble. And I think that's possibly to show what it would have looked like. They wouldn't have had the bare stone, but they would have had it clad in marble, perhaps. Just to the other side is a small square pillar, perhaps no more than 1.5 meters tall, which has been partially reclad in marble, again to, I guess, show what it would have looked like in the time that Paul was here. So there's a big group of tourists that are getting their photo taken by their guide at the moment. Yeah, they're all very happy about that.
So if you want, listen, if you don't want the pleasure, thank you as well. Thank you. Thank you, sir. Thank you so much. Guys, you're showering here. Thank you so much. Thank you so much. Take care. Thank you. Thank you so much.
So what I'm looking at here, stood in front of, is this forum, the Roman forum, the rostra, or the bema of the Roman forum. And I'll read this inscription. There's an information plaque here telling us what it is and what I'm looking at. The rostra was the venue for public ceremonies from which the assembled citizens were addressed by the proconsul of Corinth. It is thought to have corresponded to the bema, mentioned in the Acts of the Apostles. The Apostle Paul was brought to the bema by the elders of Corinth synagogue, who accused him of subversive teaching against the Mosaic law. The proconsul Gallio, however, judged that the teaching did not constitute an offence against Roman law. In the Byzantine period, a Christian church with at least 2 phases was built on the site and ruins of the rostra. The second phase was a 3-sided basilica in the 11th and 12th century. Each side of the bema were the main shops of the forum, the remains of which can still be seen by modern visitors. And there is this wall that I saw from afar that is it's probably closer to maybe 3 meters high. And just in front of it is a small pillar that I saw from a distance away. The pillar is perhaps 1 meter with a 1 meter circumference. It's perhaps maybe not quite a meter tall. And that is supposed to be where Paul made his defense when he was being accused. And it may not be the actual spot, but it would have been somewhere here amongst the crowds when he was being accused that he would have made a defense. And so it's quite surreal to be stood right where Paul would have stood, to see this mountain behind in the far distance that Paul would have seen. Obviously the houses that are here that are flanking this archaeological site and the trees would have changed, but the landscape wouldn't have changed. The landscape would be the same. It's amazing to think that Paul was here. This is where the Corinthian church was. In one or two spots in the ruins of ancient Corinth, there is the odd pine tree. The pine trees aren't long, thin and tall, perhaps like in other places in Europe. They're a bit shorter and wider. But the wind has just started to pick up. It's carrying the voices of children playing in the playground of a local school I can hear in the distance. But I just love the sound of the wind blowing through the pine needles of these pine trees. There's still lots of tourists wandering around the compound, wandering around the site, crunching through the gravel. And we're sat at the moment in the shade of a pine tree on some ancient stones. I don't know what these stones would have been used for. They're very rough. They have been fashioned, but a long, long time ago. But they are nominally rectangle. They're about perhaps 80 centimetres high, 50 centimetres wide, by perhaps 80 centimetres deep, and they just sat here. Whether they're part of an old wall or whether they've just been moved here, it's hard to say. But it's nice to be sat in the shade out of the full glare of the sun. It's great just to be still and listen to the sounds of the wind in the pine trees, including the one directly above our head.